Warning, the Stone Age Gamer includes a lot of bad language. Cover your mother ears.
Good evening and welcome to the Stone Age Gamer Podcast. I'm Kris Randazzo and joining me tonight is Grooved Plastic Disc, Dan Ryan.
I'm like a postcard size, too. It's great. Fit right in your pocket.
We were fortunate enough to land an interview with Aaron Hamel from Shore Phono, a record company who has put some awesome video game soundtracks on vinyl, including some upcoming stuff from Sunsoft. What kinds of super secret information were we able to squeeze out of him? Check your needles, because the Stone Age Gamer Podcast starts now. Hi everyone, this is episode 429 and it is the week of September 23rd, 2022. Dan, how the heck are you?
I'm doing pretty good, Kris.
Yeah.
Like, all things considered, in like this horrible nightmare hellscape of a world we live in, today was all right.
Yeah, same
and I'll
here.
take that.
Got some
I'll take that.
Some cold symptoms, some allergies, good times.
There was some good news that came out this week from the Nintendo Direct and the PlayStation show, and Earthworm Jim getting added to the Genesis thing. And we'll talk about all this next week because we have an interview. But it's been an okay week.
Yeah.
And I'll take okay.
I will take okay. Yeah, it was a solid all right. So yeah, we got to sit down with Aaron Hamel from Shore Phono. He was a super interesting guy. There was a lot of conversation in there I did not expect, and I'm not going to spoil it for you.
Yeah, it really went places.
It went some interesting places, and his bread response was a new one. So
yeah, it's the first for us.
Absolutely. So here, without further ado, here is the interview. All right, so we are here with Aaron Hamel. Is that how you say it, Hamel?
Yeah. Yep.
Awesome. Nailed it. All right. We're here with Aaron
first
Hamel
try.
From Shore Phono, and what exactly is Shore Phono? Well, let's get the heavy lifting right off the bat here. Tell our listeners who you are and what you do.
Well, I co-founded Shore Phono Co. In 2013, which is a record label that has grown to become pretty big in the video game music on vinyl space. We do a lot of other things as well, but that's sort of the bulk of what we've been doing for the past, 5 years or so. And yeah, we've been chugging along. We've just put out. We're just working right now on our 150th release. Wow. So we've been cranking them out, especially in the last couple of years when we started doing it full time. So yeah,
that's awesome.
Here I am. Yeah,
150 releases since 2013. So that's 8 years. 9? No, 8 years. 9-ish.
9 years. 9-ish years. Yeah. I mean, the first few years, like I didn't start doing it full time until a few years ago. And before that, the company I worked for previously was gracious enough to kind of let me use their office after hours to pack and ship orders and all that sort of stuff. So we were doing like 1 to 2 releases a quarter basically. And now we pretty much do a new album, whether it's one of ours or one we're distributing for another label, once a week, pretty much.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Did you guys always do video game music, like from the get-go? How did you get involved in getting video game music on vinyl?
So my partner and I met at I actually came to New York. I'm originally from Michigan. I grew up in the Detroit area, and I went to Michigan State, and then during my time at Michigan State, I interned for a film company called Troma here in New York, which is a B-movie production house, if you're familiar.
Yes, we are.
Sounded like somebody is.
I adore Troma Films.
Yeah,
adore them.
Yeah, so between my junior and senior year, I lived in New York for the summer and interned at Troma's offices, which was a great experience. I got to do a lot of fun stuff. And then the year after, when I graduated, they were gearing up to make their next movie. which was a sequel to their 80s film Class of Nukem High. So I was dying to go out and work on this movie. They filmed it in Niagara Falls, New York. And I got up there and with the intention of, just doing whatever. I had no idea what it was going to be like. I just knew that I wanted to be a part of it. And eventually I got drafted to becoming the assistant director on the movie.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Absolutely no experience doing it. If you watch on the DVD, there's a documentary on the making of the film, and you can watch me get chewed out multiple times by Lloyd Kaufman, the director. But through that experience, the producer of the film, Justin, who's I met and became my roommate and then my business partner, and we worked at Troma together at the time. And we started doing Ship to Shore. Justin is, I don't know if you're familiar with Tiny Tim, the musical artist, Tiny Tim.
For
Tiptoe
sure.
Through the Tulips. Okay. So Justin is his biographer, as well as doing all these other things. And he wrote
That's awesome.
He wrote his biography, which is called Eternal Troubadour. It's a fantastic book. The audiobook just came out recently that we produced. It was narrated by Tim Heidecker.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, yeah, so he has this huge Tiny Tim collection, and among that was a acetate of an unreleased Tiny Tim song. So he came to me one day, we were just like hanging out, doing whatever, and he's like, I want to put this Tiny Tim song on an Edison cylinder and sell it and make like 50 copies of it. And there was a guy in California who... he went by the Victrola guy on eBay, and he had a service by which you could send him a song, and he would take old cylinders that were too moldy to play, and he would shave them down a little bit, and then record new songs onto them. So we put $300 each together, which was an insane amount of money for us at the time working at Troma. But
Sure.
we were like, this will be, who knows what could happen, it could go well. And it went really well, and we sold out of them. And then instead of, it was really intended to just be a one-off project. That's why it's called Ship to Shore Phono Co, because the name was made for this like Edison cylinder, which had this like retro packaging. And originally it was Ship to Shore Phonograph Company, because the whole packaging was intended to be like those old cylinders. But then, we just ended up funneling the profits of that into the next release, which was a soundtrack to Class of Nukem High. That became a success. And then we did the soundtrack to George Romero's film, Martin, which did well. And then through that, I was able to get, after we had a few releases, I was finally able to get in touch with Sony, who had the rights to do Mother, the soundtrack to the Famicom game Mother. And that enabled us to do a Kickstarter for that. And we raised about $77,000 over the course of that Kickstarter. And that's
How
what
did
really
Sony get the
started
rights to the soundtrack to Mother? That's so weird.
Sony, see, I can only speculate on these matters. I believe because they also have the soundtrack to Mother 2, Earthbound. And that's where we licensed that from as well. And I think... because the Mother 1 soundtrack that we have is sort of it's like a pop album that at the end of it, there's like a medley of the chiptune stuff. But most of it is a pop album. So I think they somehow made a deal with Sony to produce the pop album aspects of it. I'm not entirely sure. But for the Earthbound one, I think it has some, because the sound chip that's in the Super Nintendo is a Sony produced chip.
Right.
Sure.
So
right.
perhaps there's some kind of deal there, because Sony released a lot of soundtracks to Super Famicom games in Japan only. They've only retained the rights to Earthbound for some reason, but anyway. But yeah, so
because
anyway,
it's Earthbound and nothing with... we cannot have nice things when it comes to Earthbound.
well, at least
we just
it did enable us to license it for release outside the US, which is something that Nintendo won't do with any of the other soundtracks. So I guess it kind of worked out in the end for us anyway. But yeah, so that was sort of where the video game thing started. And then, a big passion of mine is video games. And so once I saw that, the Mother, we had set the goal for that campaign at about, I think it was like $42,000 to press 1,000 copies of that record or something like that. Maybe it was 2,000. And we smashed that record. We smashed that goal within 24 hours.
Wow.
So I knew there was something, video game soundtracks on vinyl were really just barely starting, and I knew that it was going to be something. So I immediately I started shaking every tree to get as much as I could, and it went from there.
I have
Sorry
to be honest.
Long-winded explanation, but
I was about to say, I have to be honest with you. That is one of the most absurd origin stories I've ever heard, and it might also be one of my favorites.
Did you expect it to involve Tiny Tim and Troma? Yeah.
What did you go to school for?
I went to school for film.
Film.
I really wanted to be involved in the film industry, and then I worked on a Troma set, and I didn't want to anymore. So then I came back at it. When I came back, again, watch the documentary on the Blu-ray. You'll see me again getting chewed out multiple times. But when we came back, I worked in their office, and that's when I worked under Michael Hers, who's the other head of Troma, and he's sort of the business end guy. Right. And I learned a lot working under him about like contract negotiations, all sorts of things that I, didn't take classes on at school. And I learned so much about that, and I really ended up enjoying it. And then after that, I worked in a film distribution company as an art director. So I sort of got to do a creative thing there, but I really liked, putting together these albums and dealing with the licensors and all that stuff. So I kind of just fell into it. It's weird. I never thought I would be doing this.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here and I'm just thinking to myself, like, I know it's a lot of hard work and trials and tribulations, but damn, I'm jealous, man. I would have loved to work on. I mean, I would have hated working on a Troma film, but it's one of those things where, like, if you get Troma Films, and like, and Kris could appreciate this because while Kris is not the biggest fan of things like The Toxic Avenger, at least I don't think you are, Kris.
I have an appreciation for them.
You are you do appreciate that sort of genre specific thing, and as I'm looking through your catalog here on the website, the website, whatever that is, I was looking at both of them, the site and the sote. I see
you found the sote, huh?
I did, yeah. It's hidden. It's good. I see what you tried to do, but no, you can't. Not going to pull one over on the Stone Age Gamer podcast. The video audio system release of Manos: The Hands of Fate, and that is right up Kris's alley.
That is true.
So that was we did an LP release of that many years ago. It was our 5th release, I think. It was between Mother and Mother 2.
Fascinating.
And that was something
Manos: The Hands of Fate, Mother 2. That tracks. That makes perfect sense.
But that had totally fallen into our laps as well in a beautiful way, because I'm a longtime member of the Something Awful forums, and one day I was browsing on there, and there was a thread in the movie board portion of the site, and it was a guy who had said, "I've found the negative to Manos: The Hands of Fate in a storage locker in LA. What do I do with it?" And I followed this thread for years, and he had just found it was a storage locker full of film prints, most of them worthless. But then Manos: The Hands of Fate, the negative, was in there. So over time, he restored it. It's on Blu-ray now, and it looks amazing. So I reached out to him, and I was like, I want to put this out because the music to Manos is so interesting and weird. It will totally fit with what we're trying to do. And he said, "Well, you're in luck because I've also somehow found the original like mag tracks to Manos: The Hands of Fate." So he scanned them all. He had them all digitized, and I got them all, and it was 7 reels of mag sound, and it's just the soundtrack of the movie, but it sounds so clear, especially if you're used to watching the, Mystery Science Theater episode like I was.
Yeah.
And I edited it down myself, and it kind of is like those book on, or the story of sort of albums, because it has like dialogue and all the stuff is kind of mixed in because that's just the way it had to be. But I think if you, and that version is on digital now as well. The LP is long gone, but the digital version and the cassette are still there. But I strongly believe that it really does work if you're not seeing the ineptitude of the movie, of the filmmaking. But if you're just hearing it, it sort of creates a pretty unsettling atmosphere. So I highly recommend it if you are a Manos fan.
I'm trying to remember music from that movie besides the haunting Torgo theme.
Yeah,
just the only things that come to mind sound like jazz in my head. But
yeah, it is. It was a jazz. We found out so much about the making of that movie in the process of this. So yeah, it was like two guys who were in a jazz band, and they composed all this music and performed it all. And the opening and closing has a vocal theme. By a jazz singer who was local to El Paso at the time. And we found her. She was still alive. I believe she still is. And she lived in Hartford, Connecticut. And she came down, and we had a screening at a theater in New York, and she was signing autographs and did a few bars of the ending theme in the theater. It was an absolutely magical night. And I still have my copy of the album that she signed for me, and that's framed in my apartment.
That's incredible.
That is amazing.
So
we've had some real times in our time doing this, doing Ship to Shore.
Before we dive deeper into the video game aspect, being a video game podcast and all, I am really, really curious. I have just recently seen Hellbender, the film. How did you go about getting the soundtrack to that? It's such an interesting film, and the story behind the family and how they do things, fascinating, right?
Yeah.
How did that come about?
So clearly you're a horror fan. I'm getting that much. Okay.
Yes.
So Justin is also the producer of The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs.
Jesus.
So he's one of the producers of that show. So that's why, I don't know if any are on the website now because most of them are sold out, but you'll see a lot of Last Drive-In stuff because we kind of tie everything in, it's a big spider web that we've got going on. And Hellbender was slated to be an episode of Last Drive-In. So we talked with them, and that's just how it came about. He knew about it because it was pitched and accepted to be on the show, and that was it.
That is super duper cool.
Yeah, we've done a lot of great. It's been great having that outlet for the releases as well, because we have a good advance notice of what's going to be on the show, and then we're able to find, figure out what releases we can do to launch on the night that those episodes air. So it's a great synergistic thing we've got going on.
Yeah, that's awesome. And for any of our listeners out there who are interested in interesting indie horror films, Hellbender was really very cool, really interesting.
It's really good.
Yeah, it's really good, and it's a the whole production company is a family, mom, dad, and the daughter, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
They write, direct, edit, they do the whole thing.
They produced the whole soundtrack.
Yeah.
It was amazing. And on the episode of Last Drive-In, the family was on it, and they performed the theme song of the show. It was a really nice thing. And the LP that we did of the soundtrack, we did a flexi disc that came for free that has that performance of them doing the theme
that's
song.
So cool.
What exactly is a flexi disc?
A flexi disc is a very thin piece of plastic that has record grooves stamped into it. They used to be given out you could put them on like the back of a cereal box, or like I had them. I would buy like old issues of Mad Magazine, and they would come with flexi discs inside of them. But they're typically extremely low quality. Like we've done several. You can also press them into postcards, and we've done that and like given them out with releases. So
that's awesome.
They're cheap to make, but they sound it. But they're great promo. They're great promo things.
Well, they have like a certain nostalgic charm to them.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
We came into like in full disclosure, like I wanted to come into this interview kind of blind, which is not exactly the best way to do show prep. At least I don't think that's like how the professionals do it, but we are very, very far from professional. And I am just fascinated by this entire story. This is
Thank you.
This is wild to me.
Yeah, it's been quite a 10 years. Almost 10 years, I guess. But this is my 10th year in New York, so it's been quite a time. I've been getting very nostalgic about it myself lately.
It's hard not to. Like Kris and I, we talk about this kind of stuff a lot. Like, and I know Kris has a video game music podcast that I'm never invited on, but like that's neither here nor there. But like it's really hard not to be romantic about this stuff. Like it's as you get older, and I think that's one of the things that we try to like focus on a little bit with the stuff that we do. Is that it really is, it's hard not to be romantic about that, these like periods in your life and, all of that stuff. Not to get like too, dick and fart jokes. I'm sorry, that's what we're supposed to be doing, but, it's just, I'm drinking. It's going to be a weird show. What do you want?
No, totally. I mean, yeah, there's been a lot of, it's just been going over in my mind all the things that have happened, especially 150 releases. It's been a lot of hard work, but a lot of really great times. So that I wouldn't trade for anything. Even though I complain about the Troma experience, I honestly wouldn't have traded it for anything. Like it was completely invaluable as a learning experience, and it was great. So.
All right, Kris, you better start asking some video game questions, or I'm just going to keep talking. There's more horror movie sounds.
I was thinking, I was starting to wonder if I was on a video game podcast.
I want to know about Basket Case. I want to know about Maniac Cop. But like, Kris, you better take over.
Being fascinated, but sure, I'll segue into some more video game related stuff. So I guess the first question that came to my mind, this came to my mind weirdly because I had a friend. I got a copy of the Snake Rattle and Roll soundtrack on vinyl. My friend bought it for me, and that was Fangamer, I think.
Yes,
did that one, and so I got a copy of it and I posted on Facebook. Like, yeah, this soundtrack's great. And this guy I went to high school with, who I hadn't spoken to in decades, he had like popped on there. Was like, yeah, it's a really good record. I'm like, wait a minute, I thought I was like one of 5 people on Earth that would like the Snake Rattle and Roll soundtrack. I mean, don't get me wrong, I agree with you, but why are you commenting on this? And it turns out that he did the mastering for that record. He works in record mastering. It's like, what? He told me, like, check the scribe in the whatever the middle of the record's called. It was like, I don't know what those words mean. And then he explained it to me, and I held it up. It was like, why is your name on my record? What is this? So I had him on. I had him on the Game Music podcast and just talked to him about the whole mastering process of taking video game music and taking an inherently digital medium and applying it to an analog medium. It's like, it was kind of a fascinating thing to me. Like I've always been huge into video game music. It's never really occurred to me that I would even want video game music on vinyl until I got that Snake Rattle and Roll soundtrack. It's like, this is amazing. I love this. Now I've gotten a bunch more since then, but how do you guys handle the mastering process? Like, do you guys have a specific person you go to that handles your mastering? And how important is it that you get that aspect of it right? Because I've gotten I've run into the last 2 records I bought have been somewhat problematic for me personally because of the way that they sound that is so different from the way they sound coming out of a CRT television. Like I just
what were those records?
Well, the one I'm having one that I've been having a problem with is the Battletoads from I Am 8-Bit. That was kind of a weird. I think it's a pressing issue, but I have no idea. There's one of the spots at the end of the first side skips because there's a little tiny dent in it, and they've sent me 2 more replacements, and they both have a dent in the same place. So I have 3 records with the same dent in the same place. But more to the point about the sound difference, I just got the Mega Man 2 and 3 record. The 2 in particular has like a lot of these weird issues where it sounds like each one of the notes isn't hitting immediately. Like every note almost seems like it's doing a quick fade in to being played as opposed to just like playing straight up. And then in Mega Man 3 in particular, that's one of my favorite soundtracks ever, Proto Man's whistle sounds like a totally different instrument. And I'm so curious how that even happened. I feel like there's something genuinely wrong with the 2 side of it. The Mega Man 3 one is like the rest of the record sounds fine, but the 2 one just sounds like there's something wrong with it. But regardless, it seems like the kind of thing, at least from my limited knowledge, that this was music that was put onto vinyl. And this is what my friend Adam told me, is that a lot of people put this music on vinyl without giving real consideration to the differences between the different mediums. Like when you master something for vinyl, you have to do it very specifically for that medium, because what sounds good, what sounds one way will not necessarily sound the same way when you translate something that wasn't made for vinyl to vinyl. Yeah. So how do you guys handle that? Because I don't think I have any of your records. I missed out on the Rocket Knight Adventures one. I didn't find out about it until it was already no longer in print. And so how do you guys approach that?
Yeah. So it's a 2-step process with a lot of the video game stuff, especially the disc based stuff. So now we do all our recordings, at least when we can do them, on original hardware. We'll do new recordings, and it's kind of over my head technically, honestly, but I have a friend named Jeff Roberts who lives in Canada, and he's in a band called Martial Art, whose album we had put out a few years ago. It's sort of chiptune rock band, which is a great album, and still available on shiptoshoremedia.com. But he is a wizard with this stuff, and he has given me some of the most beautiful recordings of this stuff that so far surpasses, because we're often given stuff by the licensor, Konami, Sega, whoever, but most of the time the stuff we're given are old CD masters. Because they just don't have, the original data or whatever, and that's just what they have around. So we'll go to the source, get new recordings, clean them up, and then once that process is done, I'll send it to our normal mastering engineer, who does sort of the EQ process for vinyl specifically, and his name's Dietrich Schoenemann. He's in New Jersey. And we've worked with him since like our 4th release. So he does all our mastering, whether it's a video game soundtrack or not. But yeah, that's generally the process. Jeff is really great at what he does, and he's like, for our recent, he really goes above and beyond. Like the recent Phantasy Star album that we put out, there was some kind of issue with recording it. Like it was giving like a weird technical issue that is present on every other recording of the Phantasy Star soundtrack that's ever been released, and he somehow fixed it. So the version that's on the LP is like the definitive version of that soundtrack, because he fixed some like technical glitch that's been present in it for ever since it's been released.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So yeah, I think a lot of the times, companies either, the licensor will sometimes say, you have to use what we gave you. That it does happen sometimes. I mean, there've been records where it's just clearly an older CD master, and I know it's not from a lack of caring on the label's part. Sometimes it's just something you have to do, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So they'll send you like some old busted shit and be like, nope, that's it. Don't make it better.
Well, a lot of the times, the licensors, they're very, they can be very protective, and
sure,
it's their prerogative. Whether it's a whole other discussion, but yeah.
it seems a bold choice to be like, nah, we want it to still sound like shit though.
Well, and a lot of the times they just don't know. It's like they have this one master of, you've got a master of the Castlevania 1 soundtrack, and they just have that. Konami has that, and that's all they've ever had, and they don't even really think about it because they're not in the business of releasing music.
Right.
So then when a record label comes along and is like, hey, this master, it's like full of reverb and has a bunch of sound effects laden all through it and whatever else, Konami in particular is very amenable to allowing you to change those types of things. So, yeah, it just depends on the licensor, really. But yeah, we and the other Data Discs. I don't know if you're familiar with them. In London, they do a lot of Sega stuff, and they do all from hardware recordings, and that's been really important to us since we started doing this. Wherever it's possible to do it, we definitely do it.
How do you go about? Okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, by all means, you. After you, sir.
How do you right? So you're working with these different companies. How do you go ahead and decide like what's the license we're going after next?
In the beginning, it was really just because, especially in the beginning, like the first company we really approached outside of Sony was Konami, and at that time, I didn't think this was going to go on as long as it would. So I was like, okay, I have one, in my head, I'm like, okay, I have one shot. Like, what do I want to do? And to me, it was like, I want to do, I don't want to go after Castlevania because like somebody's going to do it. And like, I want to do something that like no one else would do just so that I have it. So that's when we did Snatcher and Lagrange Point, which was a Famicom only game that has this incredibly complex sound chip. Basically sounds like a Sega Genesis on a Famicom. It's incredible. So we did those two, and then we started, delving deeper and deeper into the library. But I tend to like IPs from these companies that are sort of not I don't want to use the word not respected, but not utilized by the companies. So like you said, Rocket Knight Adventures, with Namco, Klonoa, those kinds of things that have really rabid fan bases in the States, but there's nothing for those fan bases. So I wanted to create those things that I wanted as a fan too. And that, something that I would buy, and I was just hoping people would also buy them, and luckily they have.
So let's talk a little bit about Rocket Knight Adventures, because that one's pretty fascinating to me. I heard this weird rumor a long time ago that the reason that game has never shown up on any sort of like re-release at all is because like just nobody's ever asked Konami for it or something weird like that. How did that entire process go of like getting Rocket Knight Adventures, and what kind of stuff did Konami give you? And what did they even have to say about the entire process? Like, it seems like one of those things that I can't imagine anyone at Konami even thinks of, but there it is.
It's interesting with Konami in particular. I mean, we've worked with Konami the most and the longest of any of these companies, so I have the most experience with them. But with Rocket Knight Adventures, they had nothing, no audio, no archival artwork, no anything. So that's why the cover of the album is a screen capture from the opening cinema of the game, and the back cover is like the reverse of that. So I kept it, we had to deal with what we had, and we did an original hardware recording of the soundtrack for that one. But in terms of how they reacted, they liked it. They liked that we were doing it, and I remember hearing, I think this actually might have been when we were doing Sparkster, the Genesis version. There was somebody high up in the company who like got wind that we were doing it, who had worked on the game and was like really happy about it. So, and that's happened more than a few times, like especially with Konami. Like I remember when we were working on the Adventures of Bayou Billy album, and we worked with. I
didn't know you did that. What a great soundtrack!
It's an amazing soundtrack, and yeah, so we were working on that one, and we have we often work with Jeremy Parrish of Retronauts to do our liner notes for these kinds of releases, because it's really important. It's really important for me to give like a historical perspective on a lot of these, especially the older soundtracks that people may not even be familiar with. So we have to send the liner notes for approval, and we had sent Jeremy's liner notes for approval on that one, and it came back from Konami, and they were like, "This is really good, but somebody sent this note along," and it was somebody high up in Konami who sent along a detailed explanation of how he stayed up for like 48 hours to figure out how to replicate a guitar strum with the NES sound chip.
That is awesome.
Yeah, you find people in these companies because, Japan, it's so common that you just stay at one company for your entire life. These people who worked at Konami in the 80s who are now like way high up in the company, but, were there when all these great things were being made and have a lot of knowledge to impart about them. So it's great that they do that from time to time.
It reminds me a little bit of the Snake Rattle and Roll soundtrack that I got. There's a whole story on the back of it from David Wise about writing the Genesis version of the soundtrack like super fast. Like they contracted him to do all new music for the Genesis version for some reason, and like he had to come up with a bunch of this stuff like super fast. It's a pretty funny story, but. Back to the Rocket Knight soundtrack in particular makes for a really good example of this. A lot of old video game music, it's kind of difficult to tell who was responsible for, like who wrote it. And I know that the Rocket Knight one, I'm pretty sure has several different composers on it. How difficult is it to find out how much contact do you have with the people that actually wrote some of this music? In any of these circumstances, I know you just said that one person sent back a note, but and as far as like others, have you ever encountered a soundtrack that you wanted to do that the composer wasn't necessarily clear who that person was, and how do you go about finding that stuff out?
So again, it sort of differs by company. Like with Konami, their soundtracks are generally just credited to Konami Kukeiha Club, which is their in-house sound team. So we don't put the composer names on the albums, and that's dictated by Konami themselves. But with, say, when we work with Taito, when we did the Darius and Darius 2 albums, they gave us great access to Ogura, who doesn't even work for Taito anymore. But they set us up, and we did a long interview with him, and it's a really great piece in the liner notes. So we do get access to some of these composers, which is really nice. But a lot of them, especially at those bigger companies, they still work there and are just high up in the company and have more important things to do than talk to me about something they did 25 years ago. But yeah, it is nice when you do get to talk to them. Like we're next week, as of this recording, I don't know when this is going live, but on Tuesday we'll be putting up the soundtrack to Mr. Gimmick, the Famicom Mr. Gimmick.
I was gonna ask you about that. I have questions about this whole situation. Yes. So in that process, I was able to interview Masashi Kagayama about his work on that soundtrack, which was a really great experience. He was a lovely and humble man who is just continues to be flabbergasted that people outside of Japan not only know what Gimmick is, but like love it enough to put it on vinyl. Yeah, he doesn't work in video games anymore, right? He's like a jazz musician.
Yeah, he was a jazz musician before, and then he only did a handful of games, and Gimmick is by far his best known outside of Japan.
It's a masterful soundtrack. That the fact that most recent episode of our my game music podcast was on Gimmick, because we had been on hiatus, and it seemed like with it getting re-released and everything, it seemed like a good time to do it. And I just freaking love that game. The soundtrack is extraordinary. Sunsoft's late soundtracks in general, like that and Hebereki and things of that ilk, with that
Gremlins
really deep, Gremlins 2. Yes. Oh my god, what a crazy soundtrack that game has.
Like, it's amazing. Yes,
that
absolutely.
Game's music is bananas, and they all have that really distinct Sunsoft fuzzy bass sound, that really deep bass. I think the first time I heard that was in Batman Return of the Joker. Was the first time I think I heard that
such
sound.
Such a great one. Yeah, totally. We're doing Hebereki too.
I saw that. That's
gonna be next year.
I was a little confusing on that Sunsoft video. Is it going to be half Euphoria, half Journey to Silius? Is that like this? How's that working?
Yes, so it's a 12-inch record, but each side is its own thing, because neither was long enough to...
Right. Neither of those soundtracks are particularly long.
Right. So we have two, it's sort of like each side of the album jacket is its own cover, so you can display whichever one you prefer.
Whichever one I'm listening to at the time.
Right, exactly. So it should be a good album, but that one will be out next year. But Gimmick will be out before the end of the year in people's hands, hopefully.
That's awesome, because the game got pushed back till next year, which made me sad. But
right,
I'll happily pick up that vinyl soundtrack. That's very good news to hear that I'm going to be able to jump onto that one. I want that one for sure.
And it's much nicer to have the soundtrack, because you can actually you don't have to play through that impossibly hard game to hear it all.
Cannot wait for a rewind button on that game.
Absolutely.
I finished that game. A friend of mine got me a ROM of it that I put on my EverDrive, which was how I played through it. And when I beat that game and didn't get the good ending, it's like, no, you got to go back and find all the things. It's like, what is this, Ghosts and Goblins?
It's so punishing. It's so punishing.
It is, and for such an adorable game, you'd think it would be easier, but it is... it's gorgeous, but so how exactly did this Sunsoft situation come about? How did you get involved with Sunsoft for this?
So with Sunsoft, Gimmick was high on my list since we started doing video game soundtracks. I was like, I got to do Gimmick, and I have been trying to get in touch with Sunsoft for years, and I just never heard anything back. I would use the form. Their website used to be like, I don't think it had been updated since like 1997 or something. They've since updated it. But one day, I would just periodically, like every 6 months, I would send them another message saying like, I just license Gimmick to me, please. You're not doing anything else with it.
I'm begging you.
Yeah. And then eventually, I got a response back, and it was Mr. Ochi, who is he was the one presenting that Sunsoft is Back conference, and he's sort of taken on the Sunsoft is Back initiative, and he really wants to push these older Sunsoft properties. So he was like, "You seem like a good person to do it." So, so we started doing it, and we did an original hardware recording. Jeff Roberts, again, a master of his craft. We got a original Gimmick cartridge, and he tapped directly into that chip, that sound chip. So,
nice. So you're talking the Famicom one, not the Scandinavian NES version, right? Okay.
Yes.
Because that's also a great version of the soundtrack, but the original Famicom one is like, wow.
Oh, it's so amazing. Good. Yeah. So we tapped directly into the soundtrack. So it honestly is like, he likened it to recording an analog synthesizer because of the way that chip works. Wow. So it sounds so full and rich. I was just listening to the test pressings yesterday.
And when does this go for pre-order?
On Tuesday. What is it? What's the date? I think it's the 20th. Next Tuesday. This coming Tuesday.
The 20th. The day this episode goes live for all of our patrons.
Early access, yeah.
And if you're not a patron, perhaps you should think about it when you're hearing this next Friday, and you've already missed out on the pre-order.
Exactly.
Just putting that out there. send us money. Anyway, continue.
Yeah,
Sorry.
It's an amazingly rich recording and sounds better than any. I mean, because most of the other, if not all of the other versions you're going to hear on YouTube or whatever, are going to be from an emulated source. Mm-hmm. So this is about as pure as you can get of the Gimmick soundtrack, and Kageyama himself said it sounded amazing, which was the greatest compliment I could get.
That's awesome. So, does that drive you crazy? I would imagine it might, and I'm not asking you to trash other companies or anything like that. Please don't misunderstand. But let's go with YouTubers when they rip video game soundtracks. Does that drive you insane when you hear these versions of things, and you know how it could be done and how much better it could be?
Well, in the case of Gimmick, I mean, I don't expect anyone to buy a $500 cartridge and break it open and wire directly into it and do all this stuff. I can't expect that. And well, you have higher standards than I do, I guess. But I there's a time and a place for a YouTube rip of a soundtrack. I have nothing against it, but if you're going to put out a physical product that people are going to buy, you got to put in the effort. You got to make it worth people's while. So that's what we really tried to do with this. An emulated source just was not going to cut it.
So speaking of, I guess, kind of speaking of emulation, was there any thought put into, say this Gimmick one does well? Is there any possibility of getting the soundtrack for Exact Mix, which seems like, with what little I've heard of it, is really cool, but I can't even find a YouTube rip from Gimmick Exact Mix.
Same.
What's up with that?
I have no. As much as I do. I have no idea, because it's not produced by Sunsoft. I don't believe it. It's produced by a different company. Correct? Or am I wrong there?
I have no idea. I just found out about it when I was doing research for my.
It's
podcast.
Like an arcade game that's made for a very specific type of arcade machine that's only available in Japan, and I believe the board costs $1,200. So I will never play it unless I see it one day when I go to Japan again, when we're able to go to Japan again. So yeah, I don't know, but I like you, I have heard that the soundtrack is amazing, but can find no footage of it.
Yeah, I've watched a short YouTube play of the game, and the music just sounds nuts. It's such a weird remaster too, because it just looks like they kind of colored in the NES game a little better, but then other backgrounds are a little bit different too. So it's a strange thing, but
it's a really odd duck, and I'm hoping that if the re-release of the game is successful enough that they'll bring the Exact Mix over as a DLC thing or its own thing or whatever, just so that people can play it, because just what a bizarre piece, and so fitting for a game like Gimmick to be only accessible in that way, like a game that's already $600 to buy a cartridge of,
And then you got to plunk in more quarters to play this impossible game.
Exactly. I can't imagine playing Gimmick as an arcade game. It would just
either.
Torture us. It was so difficult. But yeah, I don't know. But hopefully we do get some more info on Exact Mix at some point.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I do not believe there are official vinyl soundtracks for Blaster Master.
You beat me to it. How dare you?
I know. I wanted to, because I knew you were going there. Is that potentially something that could happen with this new relationship?
Everything's on the table. For me and Sunsoft, Blaster Master is great. Don't get me wrong. But for me, it was all about, other than doing Gimmick and Journey to Silius in particular, were two of my favorites. But getting those licensed games like Batman and Batman Return of the Joker, to do those as an LP would be amazing, because those songs are so great. And all
Fester's
Quest,
Gremlins 2, we said,
Gremlins 2, yeah. So there's so much in the Sunsoft library. And one I would love to do, which is not an NES game, but the Game Boy game Trip World has an amazing.
I was going to ask about that. Trip World's
an amazing
fascinating
soundtrack, and that is something that I have actually spoken to them about. And I'm not saying there's anything concrete, but it is something that I know is on the table. So we'll see.
Hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Got it. Understood.
Yeah.
Blaster Master is just one of my absolute favorites, and it's got such a weird history with Sunsoft, with its various sequels that have never seen any kind of re-release. And I know that the NES soundtrack is somewhat short. It would be very cool to get, like, you want to talk about a game that never gets any sort of recognition. The Blaster Master 2 for Genesis soundtrack is weird, but pretty good.
Not even familiar with that one.
Yeah, it was
not familiar with the game or the soundtrack. I didn't even know that was a thing. Was that a US? Was it Japan?
It was
only
US.
Game?
It was US only. Sunsoft
only.
made it, but
Yeah.
US only. I think it was US and maybe Europe, but yeah, it was a US only. Never released in Japan.
And super low print run too, right?
I don't know. I know it's not terribly expensive for a Genesis game, but it's certainly a thing that exists. And I tell you, a record with a Blaster Master 1 and 2 on a little vinyl collection there would be pretty awesome. Just saying.
I've written it down in my my little notebook, so
you've got at least one copy sold.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's a troubled game. Like it's not. It's got its problems, but the soundtrack is very ambitious. Like it's got that very deep Genesis bass sound. Like some Genesis stuff can sound kind of hollow. This one really, they went all in with with the sound on it. It's really wild sounding soundtrack. I love the soundtrack to it, and
cool. Yeah, I mean, I love any, like, Genesis music to me sounds so great on vinyl because of the way that, especially on the Model 1 console, the way the sound chip works. If you get a nice recording of it, it really sounds like an analog synthesizer when it's done right, because it is a Yamaha. It's the chip that was in a lot of the Yamaha synths of the time. So it can sound really, really great. I mean, I think our Rocket Knight Adventures soundtrack sounds amazing coming out of a nice pair of speakers. So
I adore that game soundtrack. I love that game to death, and I'm like so bummed I missed that. Is that ever going to get reprinted by any chance? Is that a thing that could happen?
There's no plans for it at this time. I mean, the license for that expired, so unless we relicensed it probably would not come out again. But there's always the aftermarket.
That there is. Been trying to get the Sayonara Wild Hearts soundtrack on vinyl for a while now. That's like $300+. So
that's a pricey one. Yeah,
that is pretty spicy. Now, you said you did the Genesis version of Sparkster. Speaking of, is there any possibility of getting the Super Nintendo version done as well?
No, we never. It was never really, because I had no real familiarity with the Super Nintendo version. I really only had eyes to do the Genesis one, so it was never in the cards for me. Not that I think it's bad. I've listened to it since. I just had no real familiarity with it, and yeah, it's not something we're doing right now. But you never know. I guess
it's so utterly fascinating because it's a totally different game with the same soundtrack in a different order. Like,
right. It's very strange. And that's the other reason. I mean, I like to keep the albums listenable as albums. So, like, if I didn't want to include the Super Nintendo version for that reason, like, I thought it would just sound redundant as a vinyl record because, you're sitting down, you're listening to it. It's like a whole ritual. At least that's how I see it. So it's not like having a CD where you can have all, like, an expansive amount of bonus tracks because you're just clicking around through digital files. With a vinyl record, you have to be a little more
you're committing to listen to
judicious
these songs.
Yeah, exactly. So.
It's much more purposeful than just I have music on in the background. It is I am choosing to do this thing in particular.
Exactly, and that's something I really enjoy doing, is sort of sequencing the albums, where they break in the sides, where they end, the track list. I love doing all that stuff.
Right.
I mean, usually a lot of the time we do it, chronologically, but sometimes it's more fun to, like when we did a series of albums with Taito where they were compilations of different tracks from different games, and putting sequencing those out was like a joy. I had a great time doing it.
You're professionally making mixtapes. I mean, that's
exactly
that's awesome.
Exactly.
Is there so like I'm looking at the list of Sunsoft games, right? So and I'm picking one that I don't think would ever be on anybody's wish list, just for the purposes of this question. Okay. So take something like Phantom 2040. I love the Phantom, but I don't. It's probably not like high up on people's wish list of like, oh, Phantom, especially not even the Billy Zane movie, but Phantom 2040. That's my shit, and I need that on vinyl. When the option presents itself to have Super Nintendo, like this one in particular has Super Nintendo, Genesis, and Game Gear. Is it your discretion or the company's discretion as to which version you use? Because as you were just saying, like, you know, I wanted the Genesis version here. Like, was that a fight that you had to have, or were they just like, okay, let's do that one?
Yeah, in my experience, they really don't. Not that they don't care, but they're just like, you know better than we do. Like in a lot of cases, you know.
That's nice.
Like, you know what you want, and we respect that, and they just kind of let us do what we want for the most part.
That is not at all the answer I expected.
Within reason. Yeah, like when we went to Konami and I was like, I want to do the Sparkster, the Genesis version, they were just like, okay. That was pretty much the extent of that conversation.
That's awesome.
Yeah. No, they're really they're good to work with. Or like when we did Klonoa, you know, I said I want to do the Klonoa soundtrack, but it's got to be the PS1 version. I don't want to do the Wii version. And they were just like, "Oh, okay, that's fine. Here's a CD of all the songs." And yeah, so they're all the licensors are generally very easy to deal with in that way. Or like there are some cases where like the Phantasy Star album we just did, you know, the soundtrack is so short that we were able to put the PSG version on one side and the FM synth version on the other side. Right. So that was a case where we did do both versions, but it was only because, you know, we had the space and the bandwidth to do it.
Just thinking about listening to Master System music on vinyl kind of makes my ears hurt. That's
but the FM synth version sounds
the
really
FM
nice.
synth version.
Yeah.
I can imagine that, but it's such an interesting thought. Like Master System music in general is so weird because there's some really great compositions on there. I mean, I love Wonder Boy the Dragon's Trap. There's so much great music on there, but at the same time, I'll listen to it in the car, and I have my internal monologue going on while I listen to it. My wife will be like, "This is really screechy."
Yeah, it can have that quality to it, but I think, you know, and with the Phantasy Star ones, it's like I didn't play Phantasy Star 1 as a kid. Nobody I knew had a Master System, but I did love Phantasy Star 2, 3, and 4, and I didn't just want to put out 2, 3, and 4. You know, I wanted to put out the whole set. So that was where that came from. And Sega was so wonderful in putting those together. They have such an amazing archive of artwork and all sorts of stuff. So we were able to really pull together a great looking and sounding package for that one, and all 4 of them when they eventually come out.
Have you given any consideration to any other Master System soundtracks to get from Sega to put on vinyl?
Not really, because I just am not, you know, other than the Sonic the Hedgehog Master System games that Koshiro did.
Koshiro did, yeah, that would be awesome.
But Koshiro is sort of a special case because he owns his music. He had set up those deals very early on. So like when you see Streets of Rage out there, you know, they still got to pay Sega to use the Streets of Rage name and whatever, but Koshiro was very forward thinking in that he retained all the rights to his own compositions.
Wow, even all the way back to
to
the Master System days. That's cool.
Well, because those games were developed by his company. I forget the name of it offhand, but it was Koshiro's like development company that he ran with, I think, his daughter or his wife or something.
Oh my goodness, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's why those games are so odd because they are not produced by the Sonic team, and the music is so different than what you would expect. But yeah, those are great, but I don't know that we'll ever get those. But yeah, other than that, I'm just not too familiar with Master System music, to be honest.
Well, and I think a lot of the Master System stuff too is very limited in its scope of, you know, you could do maybe, like you were talking about earlier, you could maybe do a postcard for some of the games.
Sure. Yeah, it does.
But it's not necessarily a full vinyl.
It's a lot for a full, 40-minute album of Master System music on vinyl, But, with the Phantasy Star thing, because it had that FM module, it does sound pretty nice.
Are there any pie in the sky soundtracks that you'd love to do from any games?
I mean, there are so many. Most of them are from Nintendo, so they'll never happen.
Right.
But unfortunately, Nintendo does their own thing.
Nintendo's gonna Nintendo.
Nintendo is gonna
There's
Nintendo.
So much good Nintendo music that I would love to have on vinyl. But
to me, the anything in the Metroid series, anything and everything. Like if I could do anything, I would do like a box set that spanned the entire Metroid franchise. That is what I would love to do.
I got to tell you, I know a guy up in Canada where if you get him a copy of the game, he could probably, at least get your personal copy. Not
That's
something
true.
to distribute, but I know a guy.
Oh, trust me, I have those kinds of personal things. There's no issue there, but just putting together the whole package of everything in that series would just be like a dream come true as a long time super fan of that series.
That's I find that an interesting question. Maybe it's just me, but are you allowed to admit that? Like, have you ripped things that like you'll never and like? Can you press your own, like, I just need a copy of this on vinyl? Is that something that happens? I'm so ignorant to how this whole process...
People can do that. It's a process called lathe cutting. I've never done it. I've never done it myself, but it is a process that you can do of, a lot of the times it's used by indie bands who maybe can't afford a larger pressing.
Sure.
Usually you have to run like 100 units at least, even... And at most plants, it's even more than that. It's usually like 250. So if you only want like 25 copies of an album, you go to a lathe cutter, and it's basically like dubbing a tape in real time, but with vinyl.
Okay.
So you have to physically cut into the record the grooves instead of cutting the master plate, which is how a record is pressed. Right. You just cut directly onto the record itself. And you have to do it over and over again in real time.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So that's something that is done. But yeah, that is my pie in the sky dream project.
Nice.
And is it just Nintendo being notoriously Nintendo about things? Because their soundtracks don't exist. Do they exist? I'm ignorant.
They've released
to
a couple of things on CD over the years. Like, there was the Killer Cuts CD way back when. There's a Super Mario 64, I think, got an official
There's Mario
CD
Kart
release.
64 as well. There was the Donkey Kong Country one. I believe it was like shaped like a banana, the CD or something.
Right, yeah.
Something like that. So yeah, they have done a few CD releases in the States over the years, but they still are releasing them regularly in Japan. I mean, there was a huge box set for Link's Awakening that came out when the remake had come out, and that
I remember that.
And that had the remake sound. It had the original sound as well. So they're very interested in releasing their soundtracks, but only to the Japanese. So we don't get them over here. I think the last one they did here, I remember when they used to do cool prizes with Club Nintendo. One of the things I got was the Super Smash Brothers for 3DS and Wii U soundtrack, and it was like a 2-disc CD, and it was an
cool
amazing
CD
set
art too.
Yeah, it was really good. So, but yeah, they just don't do that kind of stuff anymore. And I don't know, some people have speculated that a big reason that they don't do it over here is because U.S. the way that U.S. law works is that if you release a song in America, it becomes eligible for something called a mechanical license, which essentially lets any person record a cover version of it for a nominal fee. So by keeping their music out of America, they don't open themselves up to people recording cover versions of their songs and distributing them. That's why the only real, like, when you see like licensed covers of Nintendo stuff, it's usually those songs that have been released on CD in America.
Interesting.
Yeah. Is there then a realistic pie in the sky one for you? Like something that you think like this could definitely have, or even better than that, what would be the one that you would think you could get, but is definitely like just for you? You know, like, this is my favorite.
It's funny because so many of those things I've already done, or they have been done. You know, like Snatcher to me was like the ultimate thing. Like when we did that was our 20th release. And I remember when we got that, I was like, okay, if we do nothing else, I will be very happy. Yeah, I did Snatcher. It's one of my favorite soundtracks ever. And then when I saw Hideo Kojima tweet a picture of it on his turntable,
like you're just done at that point,
yeah,
right?
I was done. I was like, okay, I can just be done now. I feel like everything else just will not live up to that. But yeah, I've done, you know, we did Earthbound, which is, you know, a favorite. Something I would love to do more stuff with Taito. A lot of their obscure arcade games have really amazing soundtracks, and even doing a full version of what we did on our first compilation album, we included tracks from Elevator Action Returns, which has an amazing soundtrack, and doing the full version of that would be great too. But it's really a matter. It's not so much that we couldn't get it. It's just that like it's not exactly a viable property in America. So sometimes you got to make those hard choices, unfortunately. But
I think doesn't I love the game, but I'm struggling to think past much of the title screen. The Taito Superman is
the
really
arcade
cool.
One?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really good one. I mean, it's tough. I mean, those are a lot of those types of games too. You know, games that are based on licensed properties. You know, obviously those become more difficult when you're dealing with creating an album out of them. So a lot of those, like I mentioned, Batman and Return of the Joker would be great things for us. I would love to do the Simpsons arcade game on a record.
Right. But now you're dealing with Disney and Warner Brothers
exactly.
as well,
so
right?
it just compounds the headaches and the royalties you have to pay out. So it becomes difficult, but you know, it's not impossible. I mean, it's certainly been done. I Am 8-Bit did release the TMNT4 soundtrack on vinyl, so it's certainly something that's possible. But you know, never say never, I guess. But I would love to do the Simpsons. Would be high on my list. I mean, I spent so many hours and so many quarters on that game.
So just endless amounts. That sound, the extra life sound of popping in the quarter is just so good.
And that sound of them like flying in as superheroes is like, yeah,
it's beautiful.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a great little soundtrack and a really fantastic like chiptune rendition of the theme in that, which is such a complicated theme, like musically, like that, like every other chiptune version just butchers it totally. Like the one in the NES version of Bart versus the Space Beans. it's just awful. It's just awful. Not good. But it's like, I mean, you can't really expect somebody with such limited tools to recreate one of the most complicated pieces of music, you know, written in the last century. But yeah,
it's like the Simpsons version. It's like, what? Oh, it's kind of the Simpsons.
Yeah, exactly.
Simpsons adjacent.
I drink plenty of milk.
But yeah, those would be my more realistic pie in the sky ideas.
So what was it like growing up in Michigan? Like, what was your gaming scene? Were you like a console gamer, an arcade gamer? I mean, obviously Simpsons Arcade, like those sort of big touchstones, but like, where did your preferences lie?
I loved, so growing up, the first console I played, my uncle had an NES, and my sister and I would get babysat by my grandma, so we would get to play that NES. And we would go there every weekend, and my mom would take me to the video store, and she would say, you can rent one NES game, and, it was a real crapshoot. I still remember renting Beetlejuice and just being so mad at that game all weekend, not being able to get past the first screen, basically that first house you go into, and just hating that game. But yeah, so and eventually I got a Super Nintendo. I was sort of always one console generation behind. So when the N64 came out and the Super Nintendo went on sale, I got a Super Nintendo, and then so on and so forth until... I
feel like you made out better in that particular transaction.
Well, eventually I did get I sold my Super Nintendo collection to get an N64 several years later, and I only had enough trade-in credit at Funko Land to get an N64 and one game, and it was my choice between Super Smash Brothers and Pokemon Snap, and I picked Pokemon Snap, which I still, a lot of people would say that wasn't a great choice, but I love Pokemon Snap, and it is near and dear to my heart. And trust me, I played through that that hour-long game hundreds of times after getting it. But yeah, I was definitely a console gamer. I went to the arcade a lot. There was an arcade sort of not far from my house growing up, so my dad and I would go there often. I remember playing a lot of Point Blank with my dad, the Namco shooter game.
Wow,
which is
never seen that in the arcade before. I only know the PlayStation version.
Oh, really? Oh, it's a
none of the arcades
game
down here had that one.
Wait, are you guys in Philly?
Nah, Jersey.
I'm in southern New Jersey.
Oh, so okay. Actually, if you go to the barcade that's in Philly, they have Point Blank 2. Arcade game. So check it out. I was just there a few weeks ago, and I'd never seen Point Blank 2 in the arcade, and it was really, really cool to see it. But yeah, so I loved that, and I loved pinball growing up. I still love pinball a lot. So that was a really important thing. And then, all the arcades closed down, and then we didn't really have anywhere to go until I became 21 and started going to Barcade in New York. So now the arcades are back, but they're only for people who are 21 and up, which I like.
And I feel like that's kind of a thing that we're spoiled with on the East Coast, and that might just be my elitist East Coast bullshit speaking. And I fully cop to that if that's what it is. But I don't know that the barcades are super popular around the rest of the country.
I think it is becoming more and more of a thing, because I remember when I interned at Troma, and that was in 2011, and Barcade had not been around for very long. And I remember going to the one in Williamsburg, the first one, and just being like, how did nobody think of this before? It's such a genius idea.
It's just right there. It's so obvious.
And I was thinking, man, if I had enough money, I would take this idea and set it up in my college town, and I would just make a killing. And now there are those places in my college town, and there's one right by my parents' house in Metro Detroit. There's a barcade, not a branded barcade, but there actually is now a branded barcade in Detroit. So they've reached they're spreading west slowly.
That's awesome.
But I feel like every we go all over, my girlfriend and I, for conventions and whatever, and I feel like in every town there's a barcade now. It's kind of crazy. I don't know where they're getting all the machines.
The worst is when you find a Dave and Buster's, because there's children there and they ruin everything. And it's just not the same experience. I don't know if you have kids, but Kris and I do, and we can speak to the fact that
I do
children
not. I only
are
have a cat, and he cries like a baby sometimes. So.
That kind of counts. But he's probably not showing up at the Dave and Buster's and like
he's not showing up at the Dave and Buster's now. He's got a lot of naps to take. He doesn't have time for that.
What was the scene like in Detroit? Like, what was there? Because you're about 10 years younger than Kris and I. Was there like a big like convention scene and stuff going on around the Detroit area, or like, because I know around here retro gaming, I feel like, and Kris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like retro gaming, at least here on the East Coast, like the New York, New Jersey, Philly area, has been kind of a big thing for a while.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean,
we were going to conventions over 20 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, and Too Many Games has been getting bigger and bigger every year, but they've been around forever. I mean, Yestercades and Red Bank has been open for, they must be coming up on a decade now, I think.
At the
that's
very
another
least,
kind of
right?
arcade that's been popping up a decent amount. At least down here is the first one I saw was Yestercades, the pay by the hour arcade.
Yeah,
like, all the machines set to free play. You go in there, drop a chunk of change, and just you have unlimited access all day, and that stuff's been great. We had nothing like that. I was reading about those kinds of conventions and magazines and online and stuff, but they were nowhere around where I was. So it was really just my friends and I going to Funko Land and buying, when they still used to sell NES games, and we would just buy. We didn't have a lot of money, so you just go to Funko Land, and every NES game, most of them were like $1 or $2. So you just go and you'd buy the weirdest looking NES games you could find, and we'd play them all afternoon. And that was a good afternoon for us. I remember spending a lot of time playing Friday the 13th and getting very into that game.
Oh, I love that game. It's not great.
It's not
but
great,
I love it.
But it's ambitious.
Yeah.
Like a lot of those LJN games, because they were made by people who were trying way harder than they needed to.
Yeah, for sure.
Jaws is the same way.
I was just going to say, Jaws is a really cool game. I used to play the heck out of that game as a kid.
It's a really cool game, and I loved the Nightmare on Elm Street game. There were a lot of
for sure
cool ones you would find just digging through the depths of the Funko Land NES bin. But yeah, that was most of my gaming time, and until Pokemon came around, and then it was just all Pokemon all the time, and that's all we did was play Pokemon. And I just remember sitting on the front lawn of my friend's house, and we all it was 4 of us, and pairs of 2 battling each other for hours, and that was the big thing for me.
Games, cards, the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. But yeah. So we didn't have conventions, and like I said, I desperately wanted to go to them, but there were just none around where I was, and I envy people now who are coming up and having all this stuff sort of accessible, and it's a really great thing. I mean, I wish I had that growing up. It felt so difficult to get that kind of stuff. Now you can just it's at your fingertips anytime.
It's kind of a wild thing. Like we've talked about it on the show before, but like when my daughters, I have 13-year-old twin girls, and when they were little, like 5 or 6, whatever, I was sick of their shit. So like, here, have an iPad, and watch Netflix with unfettered access to whatever,
right?
On the kids app, the kids side of Netflix. And like they gravitated towards certain things because, like you're saying, everything, like the world was open to them. And I would find my daughters watching the Super Mario Brothers Super Show because they saw it and they were like, oh, it's Mario. I know Mario because Dad plays, video games. So I am aware of like, I'm not a Mario fan, but they knew, like, they're gamers now and all, but they watched it on purpose and like enjoyed it when other things were available to them.
That is mind blowing.
they went to the Mario Brothers Super Show, and it's kind of, you're right, like there's this level of unfettered access to all of these things.
I was talking about it with my girlfriend because we were just visiting her family, and she has a young niece who just turned 5 and is like obsessed with Disney Plus, of course. And she was watching Disney Plus, and I was just like, I can't imagine having every Disney movie available to me to watch anytime I wanted.
Yeah,
because
right.
When I was a kid, it was like you had to buy the big clamshell VHS tape.
Yeah,
and they cost like $70.
Yeah,
and like you bought,
and then it got put back in the vault.
Right, and you got like one a year if you were lucky, and that was it. And then you had to watch that movie over and over again. And now they have every piece of Disney content that's ever been made at their fingertips. It's
just
kind of
there.
crazy. Yeah,
well,
I mean it's sort of like it's like what they talk about in Metal Gear Solid 2. You know, that level of information that is constantly coming at you, and it's overwhelming. It's crazy. It's a very interesting to see how that generation will grow up having all that access to information at their fingertips. I mean, it's crazy to me.
And it's kind of a fascinating way, like tying it back into to what it is that you do, right? Because with that unfettered access, like I remember, 20 years ago when you were 10 and Kris and I were college age, which seems wild to think about now because at 30 and 40, what the fuck does that matter? That's nothing. But 20 and 10, very, very different lives at that point, right?
Sure.
I remember thinking back then, in the age of Napster and digital debt, like Napster was the biggest thing in the world when I went to college. Oh my God, I got the new fucking Papa Roach record. Like,
yes.
It's so incredible. And thinking to myself, there's just no way vinyl, like you were throwing it out. Like, oh God, get this old shit away. And now, because we have that unfettered access to the world, the intentionality of something like a vinyl record, like you were saying earlier, the ritual of it. I'm putting this on, I'm sitting down, or I'm in my spot, whatever it is. I grab a beer, a glass of whiskey, or whatever your thing may be, and I'm going to sit down and listen to the Oddworld New and Tasty soundtrack, currently out for pre-order on ship2shoremedia.com. Or like a Duke Ellington. Yeah, I'm here for you. Or like a Duke Ellington record, or something that I just picked up at a garage sale. There's a level of intentionality now that I think is really interesting for us as adults who have grown up and gone through the progression, as well as the kids who have gone up or grown up with everything just always there.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm constantly, like, when we started doing this, I kind of expected, like, if anybody's going to buy a video game soundtrack on vinyl, it's going to be somebody who's, my age or older.
Right.
Just because, like,
a collector.
Do kids want records? Like, I don't know. But I'm constantly amazed at the young people. They really buy these records and they really love them, and they're getting into vinyl, and it's just a really nice thing to see, because it was, when I was, I didn't grow up in the age of vinyl, but my dad kept all his records, and I got really into them when I was in junior high and high school. And I think the same thing is happening now, and I think you're absolutely right that it has to do with that it's a physical object in the world. When you are a physical object that you can experience and interact with and bounce off of in a world where everything, all the information you're bombarded with feels so impersonal in a lot of ways. Putting down, listening to a record, sitting there, looking at the jacket, all that, the ritual is such a personal thing that it's getting more and more special as the years go by, and entertainment is sort of contentified into being just something you throw on in the background, like we were talking about with CDs.
Yeah. it's like I said, I don't have a record player currently, and it's something that I am actively looking to correct. It's my birthday coming up, and my family was like, "What would you like for your birthday?" And I was like, "I want a fucking record player. I don't need a $300 record player to start, but I want a record player." And as I brought this this cavalcade of treasures home that I discovered today, as we were talking about earlier off the show, or before we started recording, but one of the records that I found today was the Decca Recordings Bing Crosby Christmas album.
Oh yeah,
and
of course.
One of my daughters is just a Christmas nerd the way I am a Christmas nerd. Like, I listen to Christmas music all throughout July because, you know, Christmas in July. And I'm like, everybody is like, dude, stop trying to make fetch happen. And I keep trying to make fetch happen. And it won't catch on with anybody else in my circle. But she, watching the wheels start turning in her mind and her starting to play, we do, where's our record player? And I was like, well, Katie, we don't have one yet. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Mom's sitting on the couch. You know, and she was, well, we have to get a record player. I want us to sit down, and like, she starts going through this whole thing of wanting us to sit down as a family with the Bing Crosby Christmas record and listen to it as we're decorating the tree. And, you know, she's 13. She's not supposed to care about that kind of shit. But like you were saying, like, kids growing up in this just cavalcade, this bombardment of information that comes at them, wanting to pull back and simplify is kind of a fascinating thing.
Yeah, it's really that. I gotta say, that is one of the most wholesome stories I've heard in a really long time. So thank you for sharing that. That's lovely. And yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that there's a definite pushback against constantly having everything in your mind, and the act of sitting down with a record with no other distractions is just a great. It's a simple pleasure that, you know, I think is a timeless sort of thing, and I think it will.
Yeah, my
five-year-old
daughter loves putting on my old Monkees records from when I was a kid.
Oh, nice.
She's got more of appreciation for records than my 9-year-old.
I tend to see that a lot, you know, just looking. I mean, I don't run our social media accounts anymore, thank God, but I do. But I see I'm just not a social media type person. It's nothing against our wonderful followers, but
it's
no, I do
literally
see
the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, it's
really
again,
is. I love all of our followers, but
a bombardment of information. But it's nice to see. You know, I'll log on to Twitter sometimes and just look at the replies or, you know, the mentions or whatever, and it's really nice to see videos of like a family enjoying the records that we put out, or like a kid enjoying them. Like, it's not how I expected this to go, and it's really nice to see that they're in the hands of not just people who are collecting them to like keep them sealed or whatever. Like,
right.
I always tell people, like, because I think because we make video game records, you know, there's a tendency to think that we're making collectibles. And I never wanted it to seem like we were making collectibles. Like, I'm emphatic that we are a record company that makes records that I want people to listen to. I don't want them to sit sealed in somebody's collection all day. So
right. I don't want to see your graded copy of the Celeste soundtrack hanging on your wall.
Right. So, I mean, and, you know, I understand people buying 2 copies, you know, keep one sealed. That's all fine. But as long as I just want them to be enjoyed, because that's what the music is there for. And that's what we put all the work into them. That's why we put all the work into them, so that they can be enjoyed in full. And seeing when I see that happen, it makes all the difficult aspects of the job worth it.
So to kind of build off of what Dan and you guys were just talking about, let's say somebody wanted to get into vinyl now. How would you recommend somebody go about doing that? Like, I inherited my record player. if somebody wanted to go out and buy a record player now, or what accessories would you recommend them get? Like, how would you recommend somebody getting into vinyl now?
If you're getting into vinyl now, I mean, I would honestly recommend, I forget the model number of it. I'm going to look it up while I'm talking. But there's an Audio-Technica turntable that's their introductory model. And it is absolutely a fantastic turntable. It's more than enough for, you know, your average person, especially somebody who's just getting into vinyl. Yeah, the ATLP60 is the name of it, and it is $150, and I think it's a perfect entry-level table. And get that and a pair of powered speakers. Don't even bother with a receiver, and do your thing. And just start, you know, looking out. Go to a record store. Go to the dollar bin. Find some things you like in there, and kind of build off that. I mean, that's the joy of it. That was always my joy of it when I started getting into record collecting, was going to the record store and just sifting through the bins. I mean, that's what the hunt was part of it. You know, it's similar to video game collecting,
sure,
in a lot of ways. Finding weird album covers that, you know, bands you never heard, because there's so many albums that never made it to CD, or, you know, not even getting into digital. So finding those types of things is like the real joy of the hobby, to me. So I encourage everybody to, if you're just getting into vinyl, to follow that practice. And not just buying online, I should say. Like, Discogs has made it so easy to find exactly what you're looking for, but there's so many albums in my collection that I bought just because the cover looked interesting or some other thing. So that I would never discount that, actually going to a record store and sifting through the bins.
Yeah, that's always a good time. We inherited the record player from my in-laws. And my wife's dad, he passed away before I even knew her, but he was a blues musician. And so her and her sister both inherited this just massive collection of vinyl. And we have the back half of the alphabet. So like there's stuff I've heard of, like Rolling Stones and Frank Zappa, but then there's just a metric ton of all this music I've never even heard of before. And it's always fun to just kind of like reach in there and pull one out and be like, all right, what the hell is this?
And totally. Yeah. That is a real fun. That is, to me, the most fun aspect of record collecting, is finding things that, you know, you just wouldn't stumble upon in your own, you know, certainly not stumbling around through Apple Music or Spotify or whatever.
Sure.
But, you know, those have their place. They're great. But, finding the off the beaten path stuff is what makes it fun. So
Karen's mom will visit, and she'll just walk right over, pull one thing out of there that I've never seen before, even though it lives in my house. She'll just pull it out, put it on, and you're like, well, this is amazing. All right, I guess I got to remember which one this is.
That's awesome.
So what is it that you, when you sit down to listen to something that is not video game music, what's the go-to? Or is there even a go-to?
I mean, I'm a big fan of punk and post-punk music from the late 70s and early 80s.
So you've got the hard-to-find Misfits records, is what you're saying?
Well, actually, so it's funny because I had a huge collection in high school and college. I had built up a pretty large collection and included a lot of pretty desirable records. But when I decided to move to New York and I knew I was going to work for Troma, I sold a lot of them in order to fund my trip to New York. So I've been slowly building my collection back up. But yeah, the punk, post-punk, I mean, I'm a huge Devo fan. I love that. I was just listening. What I've been really listening to lately, and this is a real departure from what I was just talking about, but the 1977 Beach Boys album, The Beach Boys Love You.
Oh, old Beach Boys.
The 70s Beach Boys stuff is really out there, and this album in particular is I can't stop listening to it. I listened to it on Apple Music, and then I immediately bought a copy of the record, and I've been listening to it nonstop. I love it so much. So if I walk away from this with any kind of impression, I hope it's that some people go out and listen to the Beach Boys "Love You" because it's amazing.
There is a level of harmony that the Beach Boys achieved on their records that is otherworldly, and no one has ever, frankly, fucking come close.
Absolutely, and that's what makes
it's absurd.
That's what makes this particular album so interesting to me, is that it doesn't have a lot of that stuff, and a lot of it was essentially, from what I understand, it started out as a Brian Wilson solo project that his brothers just started helping on, and then they just eventually called. They gave it to the Beach Boys, but it's very heavily synthesizer based, and Brian Wilson's vocals are extremely raspy, and it's very odd, and it's like you would never think it was a Beach Boys album when you put it on, but get through it all, you'll really enjoy. It does have some of the harmony stuff that the Beach Boys are known for, but it is a unique album. I can't recommend it enough.
Currently adding it to the YouTube Music.
Please let me know what you think of it when I listen to it. Absolutely
will. Like, I remember, probably 15, 20 years ago at this point, getting Brian Wilson's Smile record and just like putting that on and driving around to it. And I legitimately, it's happened a few times. Like, the first time I heard like Postal Service was, oh my God, and just pulling my car over to the side of the road and just I have to fucking stop for a second and just appreciate this with my whole body. I need every ounce of me to really be in this moment because this is different and important.
Yes. Well, then you will. I hope you like this because it is also the last Beach Boys album that Brian Wilson had full creative control over. So that's why it's so odd and different. But if you love that Smile album that they have put out, you'll probably like this. So please. All right. I love it. We've run the gamut from Tiny Tim to Troma to the Beach Boys now. This is a wide-ranging podcast. I like it.
This is what this show is. That we're probably going to get into some yard work here relatively. We haven't had a lot of yard work talk this summer because I've been very lazy and haven't mowed my lawn very often.
But there hasn't been any rain, so there hasn't been much yard work to do.
Well, it's also been just fuck you hot. Like when you open the door and you're like, nah, fuck you. I'm going back in. Nope.
Yard's fine. I'm good.
It's good. I don't care. I bought this shit.
Well, I live in a New York apartment, so I don't have a yard to work on. So,
I mean, your garden, your balcony garden or whatever.
Sure, yeah, we do have. We've been meeting. We have a hanging garden like that. We've been meaning to put it together, but we haven't yet. It's been a busy time, but
no, it's all good. I have a backyard I've been meaning to put together for about 3 years, but I have 9 dogs at my house currently, so that doesn't.
Moly.
We run a rescue.
Okay.
So we currently have a few fosters here that are just taking a minute to move, and and they're lovely. Cash, not so lovely. The other two, Toby and Charlotte, I mean, they're great. Cash just doesn't shut the fuck up. And that's why we can't adopt him, because I know people and they're like, oh, so we're looking for a dog. And I'm like, well, you definitely can't have Cash. And if I keep saying nobody can have him, I just don't know what that means for me. But yeah, I feel where you're coming from of like, I've been meaning to do this and just can't because of this, that, and the third.
There are a lot of, there's a lot of projects. I've got so many. Recently I bought my first pinball machine, so I've been working on that a lot lately.
What machine?
It's a Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Oh my god, it's so good.
Based on the Coppola movie, yeah.
It's so good.
It's excellent. But yeah, I recently bought that, and I've been spending most of my free weekend time pimping it out, replacing all the lights, putting different things in it. It's been a fun project, but that's been sucking up all of the time that I should be doing things that putting together that hanging garden or whatever.
No, that is a life without children.
Yeah,
right there.
My girlfriend and I, we lead the dink lifestyle proudly.
Good for you, man.
We love it.
Good for you.
Do it for the rest of us.
I know. Our dinner time conversation this evening was me yelling at my children that if anyone comes to the house, their rooms are so goddamn messy that they would take them from us. So, having to convince them that laying around in their own filth and squalor, while fun, is probably not the best way to go about life. That refurbishing a pinball machine, 6 in one, half dozen in the other.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think it's probably about time to wrap this up. I'm tired.
Fair enough.
Children, go figure.
Yeah, well, hey.
I mean, I could definitely nerd out at you about more video game music for a while, but I think it's probably best that I cut it short.
Happy to come back anytime. It was really fun.
For sure.
I would love to talk to you again after the Sunsoft stuff comes out.
Sure.
I'm pretty interested. I'm definitely getting Gimmick. Like, that one made me squee audibly when I saw that was getting a final release. But the Euphoria and Journey to Silius, I'm like on the fence about. I'm like, I really like 3 songs on the Euphoria soundtrack, but am I going to sit and listen to that whole soundtrack? And that's the thing. I only buy records that I really want to listen to the whole thing on,
Well, that's the customer I'm aiming for, is people who are going to listen to them all the way through. So
yeah,
hopefully you like Gimmick when it comes out. It's an amazing. The artwork is astounding. I'm so happy with how it came out.
I can't wait to see what you do with that one. I love it when the records have some really cool stuff on it. I mean, I like that Battletoads one that I've been having the issue with. The packaging for it is ridiculous. It's you open it up and a fist comes out at you. It's hilarious.
Oh, it's that one. That was like the first I Am 8-Bit release. Wow, takes
still
me back.
It's available on their site. I was kind of surprised.
Yeah, I think they repressed it fairly recently.
Okay.
But yeah, that was like their first release, like in 2014 or something like that.
I think cracked me up.
And
I don't know if you've ever actually seen the packaging for the Snake Rattle and Roll one. It's beyond gorgeous.
I have that one. It is
oh
really
my God.
beautiful.
That you open it up and the whole world of the game is drawn out. Oh my God.
Yeah, the gimmick artwork that we did was done by an artist named Mushba. He goes by Mushba. And he did the artwork for our Mega Man Legends releases.
Those are really nice looking.
Yeah, he does this sort of plasticine. It's all 3D model art, but he kind of makes them look like they're the plasticine clay type models that used to be on a lot of Famicom covers.
Kind of like the Gimmick Famicom box
exactly. Art. Yeah, exactly. So I knew he was the right person for the job, and it came out really nice. So I think people are going to be really happy with it.
I'm very excited. I was after that announcement, I just listened. I have a rip of the soundtrack on here, which I love listening to that one. Just popped off in my head the Euphoria one. Which version are we going with here? Like, I know when Sunsoft put the last time they tried to do a whole reinvention of themselves was around during the Wii era. They did Blaster Master Overdrive on WiiWare, and they started dropping stuff on Virtual Console, and that was the first time I'd ever heard of Euphoria. Now, when they put that on Virtual Console, it was the PAL version, but it was running through the NTSC emulator, and the music got all wacky. So,
right.
Is the intent to be the Japanese one or the slower PAL one that's not pitched messed up?
It is the Japanese one, the correct version.
All right.
Yeah. Cool. We took pretty good. There is actually a bonus track on here, and I don't know if it's like on any other thing. Jeff had found it in like the data of the game, basically, and it was like an alternate version of one of the songs that was used in the U.S. prototype version only.
There was a U.S. prototype of Euphoria?
Yes.
I had no idea.
Yep. And yeah, it had an alternate. It's a very slight difference, but it has a small difference on one of the songs, so we included that since we had the space. And Sunsoft was just like, okay, that's fine.
Wow, so. I didn't even know there was plans to even consider bringing that over to the United States. That's wild. Mm-hmm. That's such a good game. It's such a good game.
It is a cool game. Really
I was I got through way more of that game because I didn't read the instructions. I got way farther into that game than I should have without realizing that when you jump, if you press down while you're jumping, you can squash enemies.
Right.
I just thought I had no offensive capabilities unless somebody dropped one of those little ball things. And it was so hard. When I accidentally figured out that I could stomp on heads, I was like, I spent hours on this game. This is really, I felt really stupid.
But did you play it for the first time when they put it on the Virtual Console?
I did.
That was me too. Yeah.
I had no idea to figure that out. I eventually got. I liked it so much that I got some sort of reproduction cartridge of it that runs the music properly on an NES. So it was like a PAL version of the game that had that fixed the music, and that's how I played through it properly for the first time. And that was an experience. What a game!
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so before we call it quits, there's a question we always ask everybody who's a guest on the show. It's a very important question. What bread is the best bread?
Ooh, oh man, my brain says rye, but my heart says cinnamon raisin swirl.
Oh wow, that's got to be the first one.
Yeah, nobody's ever said that before.
We've never had that.
Really? That's surprising. I just had it. I was just on vacation with my girlfriend's family, and I was at the grocery store and I bought a loaf of cinnamon raisin swirl bread on a whim, and I don't think I've had it since I was like 12 years old, and boy, it hit the spot.
It's good stuff. My parents used to get the cinnamon raisin bread that had like the frosting on the top of it.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I don't think they can legally make that anymore.
No, we pretend to care about health now. We're
right,
no,
exactly.
you can't
layer
do that.
Of frosting on top. It was the best thing ever. I loved that.
Totally.
I gotta track that down. Either I make it myself. I don't know.
Well, okay, so that's the second thing I hope to make an impression on. Listen to the Beach Boys Love You and get a loaf of cinnamon raisin swirl bread, and you'll have a great night.
Sounds like a goddamn plan.
That does
indeed. Sit in a leather wingback with some cinnamon raisin toast. Listening to the Beach Boys. Oh, God. What a wonderful way to spend an evening.
I think I'm going to do that when I get home tonight.
There you go, man. Is there anything you'd like to promote? Anything specific? Pre-orders? Website, anything Twitter, any cool of that stuff?
Upcoming that we don't know about, maybe?
Well, shiptoshoremedia.com. Like I said, Tuesday is going to be the gimmick pre-order, which is going to be a great one. And, there's lots of stuff coming. Like I said, we put out stuff every week. Usually on Tuesdays, and there's lots of great stuff coming. We got the rest of the Phantasy Star games coming out through the rest of the year. We've got some Bomberman stuff coming, including Bomberman Hero, which is one I'm personally really excited about. So yeah, there's lots of stuff. There's some really big stuff coming next year, which I cannot say anything about right now, but it's big in every sense of the word. And that's all I'll say on that.
Oh my God. I'm so intrigued.
Context.
That's all right. You can tell us when we're off the air. We're very good at keeping secrets. We're from Jersey.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Exactly. All right.
we
That's good to
we
know,
all
yeah.
grew up with everybody thinking they're in the mafia, so like we're very good about like keeping secrets. Do you have any socials? Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok?
I don't have anything
schmageggy?
personally, but Ship to Shore. We're at everything. It's at STS Phono Co. And I'm on the, if anybody wants, the only thing I really do is I'm on there's a VGM vinyl Discord channel that's pretty active and fun. So if anybody wants to come on in there, I'm usually in there talking about some nonsense or another.
Excellent.
All right, well, for me, the Blaster Master thing. Look into Blaster Master 2 on Genesis.
I am gonna look. It's on my list for tonight. After I'll with my second helping of cinnamon raisin swirl bread, I'll be listening to the Blaster Master 2.
10 little cannibals. That's inside baseball. Everybody else missed that, but it's fine. Just fucking YouTube it, guys. Blaster Master 2.
I got a whole evening lined up.
We're a very giving podcast. We like to have you come and bring something, but we also like you to leave with something as well.
Absolutely.
All right, well, thank you very much for joining us, and would love to have you on again sometime.
Totally, would love to come back anytime.
All right, that was our interview. That was
it went places.
It did. It went all.
That was great.
Up and down many different roads. It was
fascinating.
Full disclosure, I am not feeling super well. Otherwise, we would have kept talking to him. I mean, Dan just would have kept talking about Troma Films forever. But
yeah, I had so many horror film questions. Like, you go on their website and there's just a ridiculous amount of like horror movie stuff on there. Like, we didn't even touch. We talked about Frankenhooker, and you guys didn't even hear that part. And we'll talk about it again later, but my God, what a good dude.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
Good dude, and just a random happenstance at a convention where we're like, hey, we have a podcast. Come on and talk to us. And man, it's one of the things that I really, honestly, truly love about this community that we find ourselves a part of, lucky enough, like privileged enough, I would even say, to be a part of, especially at the point we are now, with it's just like, whatever, we're gonna fucking talk to whoever we want. It literally is about, building community and interesting people, and I hope you guys really enjoyed that, because we had a blast recording it. And
if I have somehow willed the Blaster Master 1 and 2 soundtrack on vinyl into existence.
What he said, big. What could have been big? Like big. Like there's a. There's something there. I need you guys. I need my fucking my crew, my running crew, as Meatwad would say. Yoo-hoo, running crew. I need you guys like figuring this out.
We need to figure this out. I hope he likes the Blaster Master 2 soundtrack. He said he liked Genesis music, and like, man, Blaster Master 2, a lot of people hate on that game, and a lot of people hate on his music too, but I think it's fascinating, and it's got such a deep, deep sound. I would love to hear what they would do with that soundtrack on vinyl.
That's right. We'll write the liner notes, and by we, I mean you.
Speaking of which, he mentioned that Jerry Parrish does that stuff, and it's like, he still has my Atari game. Like,
that's right, he does.
I gotta email him about that.
Goddamn Jeremy Parrish.
Not that I'm out here itching to play fun with numbers or anything. Like, man,
no, I know, but like,
fun with numbers? Basic math won't do. Damn it.
He's got your game. Like, we met him in person, and he like, I haven't seen my invite to Retronauts yet, so I don't know about you, Kris.
No, but I have yet to.
Man, I feel like you might keep that from me, which I wouldn't blame you if you did.
No, I would not. I wouldn't go on that show without you. Like,
no, God, could you imagine? That'd be weird.
We're a package deal.
Are we? I don't know. I feel bad for you. I feel like you can't take me nice places.
All right, everyone. That is our show. Join us next week for the September 10, 20, 30, 40. Donkey Kong gets a terrible port. The Genesis finds a beached surfer. The PS2 sees its final U.S. release, and more. We are on most social media platforms, and if you want to get in touch with us, we aren't very difficult to find. All it takes is a quick look at our show notes, and you'll see links to our social media accounts, as well as all manner of other fun stuff, like a link to our namesake, StoneAgeGamer.com, and more useful links than you can shake a joystick at. If you'd like to get early access to this show's episodes, as well as a bevy of other shows on the Geekade Podcast Network, check out our Patreon, also linked to in the show notes. It helps keep this show running week after week, and all our patrons are loved and appreciated, personally, by hand.
Yeah.
This show's theme song, Squared
We're
Roots.
just putting that right out there. Okay, I mean, no
That's
fucking
the
mystery
$10
left
tier.
in this relationship.
The show's
$10
theme
to
song,
naked
Squared Roots, was written by Banjo Guy Ollie. You can learn all about his wonderful music and more by following the link to his YouTube channel, also in the show notes. And finally, as always, we'd like to thank our intrepid editor, Evan, for making this show listenable for all you folks. And we'd like to thank all you folks for listening in the first place. That is it, everybody.
Oh, wait, Chris, one more thing.
Okay.
One more thing. Did you hear about the midget psychic who escaped from prison?
No.
No, apparently, according to the news, there was a small medium at large. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Keep playing stuff. You broke me. It's over.
You get it? This is small medium at large. It's very funny.